Hey, how's it going? My name is Caleb Hegg. I'm with Pronomian.com. And today we're going to do something a little fun. We're going to look at some of the responses that I've gotten to my last video. So I did a video a couple days ago on Hallel and Shammai. And I think obviously from some of the responses, I think that there is some confusion, but nonetheless, that's okay. In the responses, people said, well, I've denied that there were historical people such as Hallel and Shammai. That's actually not what I say in the video. I say 3 times in the video that I have no problem with the idea of there being a historical figure of Hallel and a historical figure of Shammai. But rather, the whole point of the video is to say, I think that the sayings attributed to Hallel and Shammai are not actually sayings that Hallel and Shammai ever said. I think that the rabbinic Judaism of the 4th, 5th century needed to establish Judaism, a form of Judaism that would combat the rise of Christianity and would also deal with the fall of the temple. And so to do this, what they did was they gave 2 opposing views of rabbis, and that way that they could work within those opposing views. What's very interesting about the opposing views is that within the rabbinical literature, they say that the words of Hallel and Shammai are essentially given by God. They go back to Moses. And so God was the one who actually, so it gives divine weight, if you will, to these words. And this does a lot of things for Judaism. And we're going to talk about the reason why I think this and what this does for me. There's a great comment about what this does, like what my end goal was or what the motivation for this belief is. Ultimately, the motivation for this is the evidence of redaction of the rabbinical literature from the Jewish people and the history of rabbinic literature and what I think rabbinic literature, the reason that the Mishnah and the Talmud were created. And I do believe that they were created in the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, and particularly written down probably in the 4th, 5th century at the earliest, in my view. That's neither here nor there. Let's look at some of these comments. So this was, my video was posted on a Facebook page, and then there was a lot of conversation about that video. And so let's just see what the initial post said. It says, Caleb Hegg of Pronomian has just released a video where he effectively denies Hallel and Shammai as 2 historical people as traditionally understood throughout most of Jewish history. Let's stop right there. By the way, this was redacted, or edited, I should say. I'm sorry. This was edited by the poster later because of some of the pushback that they got when people pointed out that I said numerous times that I have no problem with a historical Hallel and Shammai, but simply that the rabbinic literature that is attributed to them, I don't believe actually goes back to Hallel and Shammai. So that's why it was edited. And actually, I appreciate the fact that it was edited, and that some of the rhetoric was kind of toned down a little. Nonetheless, let's keep going. He posits, that is, I posit, that what is reported about them in rabbinical literature is largely fictional. I have never encountered something go this far before, and do not think many across the Messianic movement will like it. But do watch the video and decide for yourself. First of all, I personally am not worried about the Messianic movement. That's not my concern. My concern is ultimately biblical truth and historical truth around the Bible. What I'm trying to do is help myself and others live a life of love and faithfulness to God, and to do that through the covenants and through the stipulations of the covenants. And I think that the covenants and the covenant stipulations are laid out for all people, whether Jew or Gentile. And so that's the perspective I'm coming from, and that's where I'm coming from. So I don't really, many people have said, and in fact, in this thread, there's someone who says, well, Caleb is part of the Hebrew Roots movement, even though he doesn't want to admit it. That's fine. If you want to call me Hebrew Roots, that's totally fine. In fact, I would say for ease of use, for people in the Christian church who are confused, they might say, well, Caleb's part of the Hebrew Roots movement. And I would simply say, okay, that's fine. Where I get hung up on the Hebrew Roots movement is if you Google the Hebrew Roots movement, what you get is pretty much most of the people that I have opposed. So, and I'm not going to name names here, but I have opposed strongly and vocally a lot of the teachers in the Hebrew Roots movement for various reasons, theological reasons as well as practical reasons such as false prophecy and denying the canon of Scripture and denying the deity of Christ and so on and so forth. So that's one of the reasons that I attempt to distance myself from the Hebrew Roots movement, is because I've been so critical of the Hebrew Roots teachers. And so yeah, that's fine if people want to label me as Hebrew Roots, or if they want to label me as Messianic, or if they just want to label me as Pronomian, Torah movement, whatever. That's fine. I don't care about what those movements or what the teachers in those movements necessarily think, as long as I'm on the right track of history and biblical truth. So that's where I'm coming from. The same poster, the same person who posted this, also posted one other comment. Let's take a look at that. Now, this is before the edit of the initial post, and in the initial post, the person was saying that I effectively denied the existence of Hillel and Shammai, which I think if you watch the video, you'll see that's not exactly what I was doing. Nonetheless, let's take a look at this. This is a response to someone, by the way. I watched the video. This is going to be a huge problem, and more division will come from it. I'm not sure if that's true, and the reason why is simply because I said this exact same thing on my show, Messiah Matters, with my co-host Rob Van Hoff about 4 years ago. I got just as much pushback back then, and nothing changed. The Messianic movement didn't explode. The Hebrew Roots movement didn't explode. There was no division. No one seemed to care at all. So I doubt that it'll make any change now. However, if it does make a change, what the hope that I would have is that people will look a little bit more critically at the reason that the rabbinic literature was created, and some people are just going to accept the idea that the oral Torah goes back to Moses. Some are going to say that it predates Christ, and then there's others like myself who are going to say, no, it was created for a specific reason, and that is to retain Judaism in the light of Christianity and in the light of the fall of the temple as a response in major part to Christianity. This person goes on. This is the first time I've ever heard someone question the existence of Hillel and Shammai as individual people, and I've already addressed that. I've heard people question whether they really said this or that, but not their existence. And that's exactly what I'm saying. I don't believe that they actually said this or that. So that's kind of this person is not, I don't believe that they fully understood what I was saying at this point. But the next part is where I really want to look at. If they wanted to say that they did not consider the teachings of Hillel and Shammai to have any place in the hermeneutic, all right. Well, certainly I would say that. I would say that Hillel and Shammai do not have any place in my hermeneutic. And I would even say that, and we'll talk about that a little bit in just a second, but they did not exist. Using the same criteria in this video, you can question the existence of many of the people in the Bible. I would disagree with that. We're going to talk about that in a different video. Especially the Tanakh itself. And it has been done. It is called higher criticism. So in the first, let's go back. So I have never encountered something go this far before, and I do not think many across the Messianic movement will like this. So before they edited this, they said that this was, and it might be in another comment on this thread, they said that they have never encountered any scholarship that would suggest this thing, not even liberal scholars. Okay, well, let's just take a look at some quotes here. We have a quote from Yosef Chaim Yerushalmi in the book Jewish History and Jewish Memory, page 10. He says, the biblical appeal to remember thus has little to do with curiosity about the past. Israel is told only that it must be a kingdom of priests and a holy people. Nowhere is it suggested that it become a nation of historians. This is interesting because what the person is basically saying is that Israel has remembered its past differently when it comes to especially rabbinic literature. Interestingly, this quote I pulled from a book called Changing the Immutable, which is by a scholar named Mark Shapiro. I highly recommend looking at this book. He shows that throughout history, rabbinic literature has been edited and edited and edited and edited, and that Judaism will actually change things specifically within rabbinic literature, specifically to hide certain theologies or to promote other theologies. We see this even within Christian literature as well. So let's just take this off of Jewish literature for a second. I'm sure that people within the Messianic movement and the Torah movement probably won't have a problem with me talking about the church fathers and church history, because what tends to happen in the Messianic movement is there's this huge poo-poo on anything evangelical, but when it comes to rabbinic literature, everything's okay. The fact of the matter is that I don't hold rabbinic literature as authoritative, and I don't hold it as divine, and therefore I see it as a simple historical book that we can look at, but it needs to be placed in its history. This can be seen within scholarship, especially in the past 20 to 30 years. Within scholarship, people are no longer allowing other scholars to get away with using, and this was not the case 40, 50 years ago, and I will give you examples in just a second, but 40 or 50, no longer are people saying, well, Jesus interacted with this midrash, or Jesus was responding to this that is in the Mishnah and the Talmud. In fact, certain scholars such as Instone Brewer has come under attack because he is now trying to anachronistically place the rabbinic literature back into the first century. So when we see books like, there are books that are highly supported by rabbinic literature. And you can even see this. I'll even use my father as an example of this. And I spoke to my father. If you look at Torah Resource and some of the videos that we've done there recently, I asked my father the question, what is the relationship between you and the rabbinic literature when you started writing 25 years ago as opposed to it is today? You can go watch that video. But even my father's view of the rabbinic literature, I believe, has changed a little bit in the past 25 years, because he's realized that we cannot anachronistically read the rabbinic literature of the Mishnah and the Talmud back into the first century. We just can't do that. And other scholars, other good scholars, have also realized that too, and no longer are able to do that. Now, we look at some books. So, for instance, what first comes to mind is like E.P. Sanders, his book Judaisms. It's it highly rests on rabbinic literature, and I think that his book Judaisms, I use it constantly. I really enjoy that book, and I think that it has some real historical value. And people are going to say, well, that's a contradiction. It's not a contradiction, because he's using various sources, including Josephus, Philo, other people. But where he rests on the rabbinic literature, we don't have any other claim. What I would say about that, when he references the rabbinic literature, what we have to do is we have to realize, unless there is another source to corroborate, anyway, you know what I'm saying, to back up the claim, such as Josephus or the New Testament or Philo or some of the historians of that time, unless there is another witness, we can't take it as first century witness. And let's go back to some of our quotes. By the way, the idea that this is not held by scholarship, let's just take a look at that. Again, here we go. Jacob Neusner, who is probably one of the most prolific Jewish writers of our time, in the use of later rabbinic evidence for the study of the first century Pharisaism. On page 219, he says, "It seems to me self-evident that sources deriving from the early 3rd, 4th, or 5th centuries first have to be read as testimonies to the prevailing viewpoints of those centuries, and only with very great reserve, as evidence of the viewpoints of or on the earlier periods, to which they may or may not even claim to refer." Neusner says this. I'm not outside of the realm of scholarship here. Jacob Neusner says again in rabbinic literature in the New Testament, using sayings and stories in rabbinic literature as though anyone in that time and place subjected himself to the disciplines of contemporary historical method is worse than anachronistic. It is an accusation that our sages of blessed memory, in quotes, cared mostly about preserving and handing on information. That is not what their literature proposed to transmit. That is not what they wish to accomplish. Okay, so once again, I would greatly recommend the book Changing the Immutable. You can see that rabbinic literature has been redacted and edited throughout history. Things have been taken out, things have been edited, and this just shows that Judaism does not care about the rabbinical literature in the same sense that it does about the scriptures. They're willing to edit it, and they're willing to change things specifically for what reason? And that's the question that needs to be asked. All these people who have commented and saying that I have some malicious motive here, well, okay, my motive is to ask, what is the motivation of the rabbis in writing the rabbinic literature? And I am suggesting that their motivation is to preserve a form of Judaism, not that was necessarily the form of Judaism in the first century. It was a form of Judaism in the first century, and they're trying to preserve it after the destruction of the temple and with the rise of Christianity. And this is one of the reasons that we see so many responses to Christianity within the rabbinic literature. I'll give you an example. For instance, now Jesus says, the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What does Judaism say? What does the rabbinic writing say? Hillel said it first. He just said the negative portion of it. Don't do unto others as you wouldn't have them do unto you. And what can Judaism now say? They can say, well, we had it first. Christ didn't say that. Hillel said it. Christ just ripped off Hillel. Well, no, I would suggest that that's not at all what happened, that Judaism saw a wonderful saying that Jesus said and said, we don't want to give that to the Christians. We're going to say we had it first. It sounds malicious, but I think that the evidence of the Jewish sages wanting to preserve and wanting to sway people towards Judaism, their brand of Judaism is pretty historical. I don't see why people are having such a huge problem with that. Just as a final note before I go, I will say this to the people who think that I'm trying to set up the ability to deny Yeshua, or that I am going to deny Paul's writings. I have always stood firm on a 66-book canon. I have argued that. I will fight to the death for the 66-book canon. I am not trying to get rid of any of Scripture. I am not trying to deny anything of Scripture. That is, and to me, what this shows is that people place rabbinical literature on par with Scripture. That is a problem. Thank you very much. I will be back again soon with another response to some more of these fantastic comments.